But let's talk about like that meta story, because
Hmm.
what does it tell us? Because like I feel like the lesson about the Obama years that the Biden people supposedly learned, and I feel like they learned it to some extent. I feel like to some extent they didn't, particularly in terms of Biden wanting to try and make the Build Back Better bipartisan. That was the beginning of the end of that, it seems to me. He
Hmm.
brought the Republicans in, and then when they couldn't come up with anything, he brought in Sinema and Portman, as supposedly to do due diligence, and that's where things fell apart. It gave Manchin and opponents of this time to sort of organize. But one of the other things that I think Obama did is he won his election with a certain constituency that I think for a lot of us, he betrayed in some ways.
Yeah.
I mean, he ran, there was a lot of people saying he's not an ideologue, and he was talking, he was using populist words maybe, and but did not deliver on those policies, largely speaking. He said he was going
Right.
to put on his soft shoes and walk with unions, and when there was a huge opportunity for that in Wisconsin, he didn't do it.
Right.
And that ended up costing Democrats 1,000 seats over the course of 8 years. 1,000
Right.
seats. A whole class or two of Democrats couldn't run for governor, couldn't run for because they were wiped out.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing the resurgence of that. Like when we have like 6 governors now who could have been vice president. Um,
Right.
that's what this is about in many ways. Like and the opposite happened with Hillary Clinton, right? You had Chuck Schumer going out there for every blue collar worker we lose in Pittsburgh, we pick up two in the Philly suburbs. I don't know if it was Schumer or if it was Ed Randall who said that, but regardless, that seemed to be the idea. We want to manage who elects us on some level. There's only a certain amount of latitude with this because the Democrats are the Democrats and the Republicans are the Republicans, but you try and create your constituency, and then you can follow policies that will satisfy them or not. And if you don't satisfy the constituency that elected you, you're going to have trouble in the off-year election and in the following re-election. And so, what does it tell us that she's coming out and campaigning this way?
I mean, everything's still contingent. I think the term I saw used in the New York Times was strategic vagueness. I think that's kind of the hallmark of where we're at with Kamala Harris now. She certainly
Say
has,
that's also the case on foreign policy, but we're not talking about that right
right,
now. Yeah.
right. She certainly has some advisors that are committed, I think, to furthering the Biden agenda. And I think she has some advisors that are committed to breaking with the Biden agenda. And I think, in 2008, we heard a lot about Barack Obama's team of rivals, that he was putting this Lincoln-esque team of people who just didn't like each other together and trying to get the best policy out of that. And it was all crap. It wasn't true at all. Everybody was very much on the same wavelength. I think with Harris,
Robert Rubin's wavelength.
the Robert Rubin policy, exactly. I think with Harris, you're seeing more of a possible actual team of rivals. That there is some understanding that she's getting advice from a lot of different directions, and I think it's going to be a jump ball in terms of where she's actually going to go. I mean, you don't know what the crises are that are going to come up. You don't know where she's going to have the opportunity to make a real difference. I think that as far as everything that's come out, you have to sort of assess it of, okay, are these legislative ideas or are these administrative ideas? And a number of the things she talked about in that speech on Friday, she could do on her own. Continue the aggressive antitrust enforcement that we see.
Yep.
In terms of the healthcare stuff, there's a lot you can do on the side, not just keeping going the negotiations on prescription drugs, which she's obviously going to do, but there's even more that can be done. So, we'll be readying as the fall goes on the sort of next edition of the day one agenda to see,
yes, I bet,
to figure out what what we could actually possibly do. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunity there, and the question will be whether Harris will take it. But we still have 77 days or whatever until the election. She's got to win that first.
Maybe this is for a different interview, but I'm curious as to the strategy of the progressives to hang in there with Biden, and essentially what it looked like to basically say we want X, Y, and Z policies, and he came out with some of those sort of lefty, the 5% rent cap, and
there was Supreme Court stuff,
reform, and
all of which Harris has held on to, by the way. I mean, so in that sense, you have to say, well, what the progressives did ended up, having at least some impact. Harris is going out with that same Supreme Court reform program. She's held on to, at least rhetorically, the rent stuff. I think what's clear is that, Harris's concept of how she's going to win this election is she's going to speak to where voters are in terms of cost of living. She's going to speak to the other popular parts of the Biden agenda without being Biden, and that seems to have worked, right? I mean, if you look at the polls,
so far,
she is not being blamed on the economy for certain things. In other contexts, she's kind of not being blamed for Gaza in certain ways. And, she's been able to show some distance because people simply don't believe she was at the center of those policies being made. And so she's able to articulate, I mean, a lot of this stuff that she did last Friday was already the Biden agenda.
Right.
She's just articulating it in a different way, and without the baggage of being tied to someone who was 81 years old and wasn't able to sell the policies very well.
All right, last question, because this sort of ties in and undercuts, or I should say undergirds a lot of all of this conversation. Inflation. Give me your sense, and the sense of where I guess the academic research is on this. What contributed to inflation, and if you can give me percentages, because I'm spending my time interspersed with my woodworking Instagram accounts that I follow. I get a couple these, I don't know, they're investment people or something, and they'll say something about inflation, and that's the only time I comment on anything. I'm it wasn't because we flooded the country with money. But tell us what the research says.
Well, I mean, it's very clear. You just look, every country on earth had pretty much the same arc in terms of inflation. After the initial stages of the pandemic, inflation went up, and in the last couple of years, it has eased. Now, if you look at the United States trajectory, it eased at a greater degree than any other country in the world, industrialized country at least, and is now sitting, if you look at certain measures, it's sitting at the Federal Reserve target. If you look at other measures, it's slightly above the Federal Reserve target of 2%. And all these other countries in the world, they didn't increase spending to the same degree as us, or
relative to their GDP, right?
Relative to GDP. Right. The idea that that spending alone was responsible for our inflationary period, you have to sort of put blinders on to the rest of the world, which had varying degrees of spending and yet the exact same trajectory, the same parabolic arc. So I think it's rather silly to say that. It's obvious that there were supply chain issues that we've written about pretty extensively. Right. And when those supply chain problems eased, we got to a place where inflation came down. It wasn't really due to the increase in interest rates. What that has done is mainly depressed investment
and raised cost of rent, it seems to me.
And raised costs, in fact, particularly around housing, because that's a very common channel. Mortgage rates went up.
Yep.
Investment ended up dropping down. In fact, the Inflation Reduction Act, which flooded a lot of money toward investment into the system, a lot of that was kind of blunted, not a lot, but a good deal of it was blunted by the Federal Reserve interest rate increase. If they didn't increase to the degree that they have, or if they have taken it down, which they probably will do in September, at least a beginning of it, then we probably would have had more. If you look at manufacturing construction, it's a straight line up for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And that's because of the IRA. And if the Fed wasn't trying to sort of counteract that, it would probably be in more of a straight line up. And those are eventually going to translate into jobs because the factories get built after a certain period. The construction is done, and then we get we get the production jobs out of that. I wrote about this quite a bit in my 2-year kind of summary of the IRA.
Yeah, we're going to link to that. People should read that. I just wanted to add a couple other things. I mean, you have that dispositive argument in terms of relative to other countries, but we also can see, increased prices significantly at various food chains and whatnot, and then massive stock buybacks and massive dividends paid out to shareholders. And the margins in food went up, like they spiked to a point where, in other words, those are profits. And
and what we saw in America is corporate profits around 2022 spiked. They reset at a higher level, and even though inflation has dropped, they've stayed there. Those corporate price margins have stayed higher despite the easing of input costs through inflation. And, we wrote about this in our pricing issue. The pandemic provided an opportunity to use these new strategies, whether it was technological or using surveillance tactics to know what you buy and know, what you're going to prefer. And that all has increased the surplus for those companies relative to consumers. And just to take this back sort of full circle, I think when you hear a Jonathan Chait saying these are bad ideas to crack down on price gouging, or Catherine Rampell to say that these are communist ideas to crack down on price gouging, they fundamentally don't buy the story that we just have expressed here.
That's why
they fundamentally disagree with it. They look at Econ 101, supply and demand. There was too much money in the economy. The demand went up, and that's why the price went up. And as that's being reduced by the Federal Reserve, then the price goes back down. It's pretty clear to me that is not the case. That's not what the data show, and everything kind of flows from there. There is an ideological battle around the economy between the people who were very comfortable, the Clinton and Obama neoliberal era, and the people who forwarded this change in philosophy under Biden. And we'll see what happens in the future. And that fight is playing out now amid a new presidential candidate who is not who may be something of a jump ball. Was a lot of her thoughts on this haven't been super well known. People were projecting their wishes onto her. People like Reid Hoffman going out and saying, fire Lena Khan. And so there's this sort of warfare going on between these two philosophies in this sort of battle for the soul of Kamala Harris, if you want to talk about it that way. And that speech last week shows that the Biden side has a leg up. I think that's the way to say it.
Great way to summarize it. David, Dayen, always a pleasure. We're going to link to all the pieces we mentioned today at the American Prospect, but while you're over at the American Prospect, I'm sure by the time we air this, there's going to be a lot more, and at the convention.
Yes, I will tell you. We have 4 or 5 people who are going to be at the convention. We're going to be writing dispatches every day while we're there. All of them are going to be on prospect.org/DNC-2024. And it'll be the whole site. I mean, we're devoting the whole site to the DNC this week. So if you just go to prospect.org, you'll find it. And we're going to be giving you as much of the color of the convention. You know, you've been to conventions. They're strange places. There's you know, if you just listen on TV, you hear about, you know, fighting corporate America and you know, bringing a policy back to the people. And then if you go outside, you see every major corporation holding a cocktail hour, right? So they're odd places, and our goal is going to be to bring you the side of the convention that you don't often see if you're just watching on television. So we're going to try to bring you the newsmakers, the ostentatious display of wealth that you see at these things, and give you a real flavor for that.
David Dayen, American Prospect, thanks so much. We will link to all that coverage as well.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.